I'm Matt Gishard, and this is No Holds Barred. In this episode, we're going to talk about videotaping or photographing law enforcement personnel by the public and the public's First Amendment rights. I want to say that we often hear of members of the public videotaping or photographing the police during the performance of law enforcement activities out in the public. We certainly know that many agencies have body cams, dash cams in their vehicles. There are videos in many businesses. There are videos that many people have on their porches, all of course capturing, in many cases, law enforcement activity. What are the rules and what are the rights? I want to say rules and rights because it's very important from a law enforcement standpoint that people keep a safe distance from the officers. They don't get in the way of the officers performing their duties. Officers can be injured sometimes when people try to engage them while they're in the performance of their duties, particularly trying to arrest somebody who's combative or violent. But we also all see things like the George Floyd case or various cases where citizens came up and used their phones and videotaped the police in the performance of their. What are their rights to do that? Well, certainly the United States Constitution under the First Amendment allows people to speak their mind, to do various things, and falling under that is one of the issues of do they have a right to be in a safe place and videotape police officers? And they do. The California Constitution also provides that the courtesy and of Declaration of Rights in Article I of the California Constitution and supports that. Everyone can freely speak, write, and publish his or her own sentiments on all subjects. And it's important to understand those rights, and the police certainly do. Most agencies now have a policy about videotaping and ensuring that people's rights are protected. I do want to say it's important. I'm going to talk in a minute again about the protections that police must have while citizens are videotaping. But I think it's important, and I'm looking at a report that was prepared by somebody in law enforcement for his agency about a policy. And as I say, most agencies have a policy. I will say that even in the California Vehicle Code, there is a statement that indicates that citizens, have a right to videotape officers. And I recently took the written test for my driver's license, and lo and behold, in the driver's manual, specific mention that citizens can photograph and videotape law enforcement in a public place, and that's kind of important. So there are penal code sections 409.5, crimes against the public peace. So in a designated disaster area, the police or law enforcement have a right to exclude people from entering an area. And if somebody enters that area to photograph or just enters it to take videos or for any purpose, they are breaking the law. So there are certainly laws that protect law enforcement and protect areas. Penal Code Section 69B is filming executive officers. And it says, while the officer is in the public place or the person taking the photograph is in a public place, has the right to do so. And it's not a violation of the statute to do that. California Penal Code Section 148G, the fact that a person takes a photograph or makes an audio or video recording of a public officer or peace officer while the officer is in a public place, or the person taking the photograph or making the recording is in a place he or she has the right to be, does not constitute in and of itself a violation of the law. So I want to say that. So oftentimes we've seen maybe in movies or the officers, no, you can't photograph, or no, get away from me. In today's world, a person does have a right to photograph, except if it's in certainly a designated area, as we spoke before. And even the protection of citizens from threats. If you do that, I'm going to arrest you, officers can't do that. And of course, this is for the protection of the officers as well as the public. We have seen so many cases in which videotapes are made of officers arresting people, and sometimes people get up very close and try to pull the officers off or do something, and that's absolutely a violation of the law. They cannot do that. Don't impede the officer in any way. Don't get so close that the officer feels unsafe, that people are right behind him or her. Stand back and videotape. There's an interesting case of Glick versus Cuniff, and it's a California case. The United States Court of Appeal held that a private citizen has the right to record video and audio of police carrying out their duties in a public place. And I always say in a public place, and we keep saying that, is because somebody can't trespass into a private place. If they have a right to be there, if it's their home, they certainly can videotape. But these issues come up where somebody is in a place they're not supposed to be. So in this case, actually, Simon Glick filmed the Boston, Massachusetts police officers who were on a bicycle unit making an arrest in a public park. The officers observed Glick and they arrested him. So I made a mistake back when I was citing. It wasn't a California case. It was a Massachusetts case. And they arrested him for disturbing the peace, among other things, and aiding in the escape of the prisoner. He then sued the city of Boston, and the arriving officers claimed they violated his constitutional rights. And in a unanimous decision, the United States Court of Appeal for the First Circuit held that the officers indeed violated his constitutional rights. He had a right to do that. Now, in today's world, we see so many agencies, and very few do not have body cams, and there are rules during arrests or engagement when those body cams need to be turned on. I've spoken before in No Holds Barred about some cases in which there's a dash cam, and as soon as the lights are turned on, the emergency lights, or a siren is turned on, automatically that dash cam comes on and videotapes everything that's taking place. So we want to remind law enforcement in very stressful situations at various times, but people do have a right to make those photographs, make those videos, as long as they don't impede the police activity. It's common that we see this. It's common in open areas. It's common in parks. And it's certainly not against the law to possess a camera or a phone to videotape the police. I think gone are the days of Glick or other such cases where somebody can get arrested for just videotaping or photographing law enforcement in the performance of their duties in a public place. So I want to talk about a couple things when I mention that impeding. And impeding is simply getting in the way of the officer performing his or her duty. The most common we would see is an officer is engaged in a struggle with someone, attempting to arrest that person, and the person is resisting that arrest, and somebody is right up close, trying to photograph, getting in the way of the officer, or an officer is attempting to pursue someone, perhaps a foot pursuit. People are getting in the way. So don't get in the way of the officer. Don't give directions to the officer. Don't in any way impede that officer or stop that officer from lawfully performing his or her duty. And that's what we mean in those kinds of things. And lots of scenarios we can think about, and officers attempting to detain a person, and the crowd kind of circles the person and doesn't let that officer, and they're impeding the officer in the performance of his duty. Don't threaten the officer. Don't try to intimidate the officer. Don't try to discourage the officer from doing what the officer has a right to do. So in this era of cell phones and small video cameras and all, we're seeing all the time officers are being videotaped, and it can be very helpful. I say oftentimes in the coroner's inquest over which I preside, in almost all cases, if there is a videotape available, or a dash cam, or a cam that comes from, say, a business in the area that gives us kind of a better sense of what happened, we play those so they can be very, very helpful. And again, I want to go back and state that most agencies do have policies. They make it very clear that citizens can videotape and photograph the police in the performance of their duties. And I do think that it's helpful for the safety of the police and the public, and actually helpful in getting a story out as to what actually happened. I want to go back and say kind of a funny story. Years ago, a citizen in a city made a big complaint about a police officer and how the officer treated that person's son. And interestingly enough, the officer was in a vehicle in an agency that had a dash cam. The son told his dad all these kinds of things that the officer had done and how impolite he was and how badly he was treated. The father came down to the police department, made an appointment, met with the captain, and the captain had already viewed the dash cam, invited the father in, they sat down and played the dash cam video. The officer was extraordinarily polite to the young man. He did everything absolutely right, and the story that the kid told his dad was completely wrong. But there we have a story of how helpful to law enforcement it is, in some cases, to have videos and to be able to use them. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of No Holds Barred. Please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and any questions that you have, please enter them below. I always read them. I appreciate that you write those questions, and I'll try to answer them in a future No Holds Barred episode.